The last thing my wife said to me before she walked through those airport doors was not, "I love you." It was not, "I'll miss you." It was not even a real goodbye. She turned around, rolling carry-on in one hand, sunglasses already on like the Florida sun was somehow reaching us inside the terminal, and she said, sharp, clipped, tired of me before I even opened my mouth, "It's just a work trip. Stop making it weird." I hadn't said a word. I was standing there holding her second bag, the one she'd asked me to carry to the drop-off. I hadn't asked a question. I hadn't made a comment. I had driven her 40 minutes to the airport on a Tuesday morning, kissed her on the cheek, and apparently that was enough to earn that response. She grabbed the bag from my hand, turned, and walked away. No look back. I stood at the curb for a moment longer than I should have. Not because I was devastated, not yet, but because something about the way she said it, the defensiveness before any accusation, the snap before any question, lodged itself somewhere in my chest like a splinter too small to see, but too sharp to ignore. I drove home in silence. That's important. I want you to understand that about me before this story goes any further. I am not a man who explodes. I don't yell. I don't chase. When something feels wrong, I go quiet. I watch. I think. My mother used to call it being too calm for my own good. My wife used to call it emotional unavailability, which over the years became her favorite explanation for anything I did that she didn't like. But that morning, driving back from the airport, I wasn't being unavailable. I was paying attention. 15 days. That's how long the trip was supposed to last. A company retreat, she told me. Strategic planning sessions, team building, some kind of leadership development program her firm had put together in Cancun. It sounded legitimate. She'd mentioned it 2 months earlier. There were emails.
There was a schedule she'd shown me once, briefly, on her phone. I had no reason to question it. Except I did. Not because of anything I could point to directly. Not yet. It was more like a shift in air pressure, the way a room feels different before a storm, even though the sky still looks clear. Something in the last few weeks had been off. Not dramatically, not in any way that would make a highlight reel. Just off. Small temperature drops in conversations that used to be warm. A new habit of taking her phone to the bathroom. The way she laughed at something on her screen one night and then tilted it away when I walked past. Individually, nothing. Together, a pattern. I didn't say any of that at the airport. I carried her bag, I kissed her cheek, I let her snap at me, and I didn't flinch, because I had learned, 9 years into this marriage, that reacting in the moment rarely gave me useful information. Waiting did. So I waited. I went home, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and I thought about the way she said those 6 words. It's just a work trip. Not don't worry, not I'll call you tonight. Just a preemptive defense, an answer to a question I hadn't asked. And that, more than anything else, is what I kept coming back to for the next 15 days. You don't defend something no one is attacking, not unless some part of you already knows it needs defending. We met in 2014 at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. Nothing dramatic, no cinematic moment. She was sitting across the table, arguing confidently about something I can't even remember now, and I thought, she knows her own mind. That was what drew me in. Not her looks, though she was beautiful. Her certainty, the way she took up space in a conversation without apologizing for it. We dated for 2 years, got married in 2016. Small ceremony, backyard, about 40 people. It was a good day. I mean that without irony.
It was genuinely one of the best days of my life, and I'm not going to rewrite history just because of how things ended. For the first 5 or 6 years, the marriage worked. Not perfectly, nothing is, but it worked in the ways that matter. We communicated. We fought sometimes, but we resolved things. We had a shared life that felt like it belonged to both of us equally. She was a project manager at a mid-sized consulting firm. I ran operations for a logistics company. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We had a house. We had plans. Then somewhere around year 7, the drift started. I've thought about this a lot since everything unraveled, and I still can't point to one moment where it began. It wasn't a single argument or a single event. It was more like erosion. Slow, quiet. The kind you don't notice until you look back and realize the ground has shifted significantly beneath you. She got a promotion in early 2022. New title, new responsibilities, and a new team, which meant new people, new dynamics, longer hours. I was proud of her. I told her that. I tried to be flexible, picking up more at home, adjusting to her schedule. But the more her professional world expanded, the more our personal world seemed to shrink. Dinners got shorter, conversations got shallower. Weekends that used to be hours started filling up with work calls and catch-up tasks and plans she'd made without mentioning to me first. I adapted. That's what you do in a long marriage. You adjust. You give space. You tell yourself it's a busy season, and busy seasons end. But this one didn't end. By 2023, she felt like someone I was living alongside rather than with. We were coordinating schedules, splitting grocery lists, passing each other in hallways, roommates with a shared mortgage and a standing Saturday night dinner that increasingly felt like a performance of marriage rather than the real thing. I tried to address it. Twice, clearly. Once in the spring, once in the fall.
Both conversations went the same way. She acknowledged the distance, agreed something was off, said she'd been stressed and overwhelmed, and promised things would shift. They didn't. Or they did briefly, just long enough for me to relax, and then quietly slid back. I want to be honest here. I was not a perfect husband. I worked long hours too. I wasn't always emotionally present. There were moments I chose exhaustion over engagement, and that has a cost in a marriage. I own that. But I was trying. And more importantly, I was still choosing her, consciously, consistently, every day, even when the relationship felt thin. I'm not sure she was doing the same. Looking back now, the shift I should have paid closer attention to wasn't the busyness or the distance. It was the way she started treating my attempts at closeness as intrusions, like my wanting to connect had become an inconvenience, like I was asking for something unreasonable just by being her husband. That snap at the airport wasn't the first one. It was just the one I finally stopped explaining away. The name came up for the first time in October. Marcus. She mentioned him casually, the way you mention someone who means nothing. A coworker on her new project team. Smart guy, she said. Really gets the work. She'd said similar things about colleagues before, and I hadn't thought twice. So I didn't think twice about Marcus either. Not in October. By November, the name was appearing more frequently. Marcus had suggested a new approach to a client problem. Marcus had stayed late to help her prep a presentation. Marcus had this way of cutting through meeting noise that everyone appreciated. I noticed the frequency, but I kept it filed under normal work conversation. People talk about their coworkers. That's not evidence of anything. What changed was the texture of how she talked about him. There's a difference between mentioning someone and lighting up when you mention them. It's subtle.
It's not something you can point to in isolation, but over weeks, I started to notice that Marcus' stories came with a slightly different energy than the rest of her day, a little more animated, a little more detailed. She didn't gush, she wasn't careless enough for that, but there was warmth in those specific stories that had gone missing from the ones about us. I said nothing. In December, I noticed her phone habits change. She'd always been fairly open with her phone, not that I made a habit of looking, but it was never a guarded object between us. Then, gradually, it became one. She started placing it face down on tables. She took it to the bathroom at night. She angled the screen away when she was typing. Each of these, individually, is nothing. Together, over 6 weeks, they formed a shape I recognized, even if I didn't want to name it yet. I still said nothing. What I did instead was start paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Not obsessively, not in a way that disrupted my functioning, but I started noticing and filing rather than noticing and dismissing. There's a difference between those two things, and it matters. In January, she changed her phone passcode. I only knew because I'd used her phone once to check a map when my battery died during a road trip, and the code I'd known for 3 years no longer worked. She didn't mention changing it. When I brought it up lightly, "Did you change your passcode? Mine didn't work." She said yes, her company had sent a security advisory about personal devices. Clean answer. Immediate. Almost too immediate. I nodded and let it go, but I remembered it. February brought the late nights. Not every night, but enough to establish a new pattern. Client deadlines, she said. End of quarter crunch. Plausible. Her job did have real pressure cycles, and I'd seen them before, but these nights had a different quality.
She came home not depleted the way work exhaustion looks, quiet, hungry, ready to decompress, but animated, almost elevated, the kind of energy that doesn't come from finishing a spreadsheet. I started keeping a loose mental record, not written down, just noted. Dates, patterns, small inconsistencies, things that didn't align. A dinner she said was with a client that didn't show up on the joint calendar she usually updated. A Saturday morning where she said she was at the office, but the office parking lot, which I drove past on an errand, had only 3 cars in it, and hers wasn't one of them. I didn't confront her on any of it. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't fear. It was strategy. I had learned enough about how these situations unfold to know that confronting someone before you have complete information gives them the opportunity to calibrate their story to exactly what you know. I wasn't going to give her that, so I kept watching, and the picture kept getting clearer. By the time she told me about the Cancun trip in early March, I already had a folder, mental, not physical, but structured, of every red flag dating back 5 months. The trip didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how relieved she seemed when she announced it. Not excited, not professionally proud, relieved, like something had finally been arranged that she'd been waiting for. She texted me when she landed. 1 line. Arrived safe. No punctuation. No follow-up. I replied with, glad you made it, hope the first session goes well, and got back a thumbs up emoji. A thumbs up. After 9 years of marriage and a 40-minute airport drive and a snap that I was still turning over in my head, a thumbs up. I told myself to stay even. I went to work. I came home. I cooked for one, which has its own particular quiet that I won't dwell on. I watched something forgettable on TV and went to bed and told myself that 15 days was not a long time.
But by day 3, the check-ins had already thinned to almost nothing. She had called once on the first evening, brief and surface level. How was my day? Fine. How was the hotel? Nice. Anything interesting in the first sessions? Yeah, a lot of good energy. The call lasted 6 minutes. I know because I looked at it afterward in my recent calls log and sat with the fact that 6 minutes was apparently what our marriage was worth on day 1 of a 15-day trip. After that, texts only, and not many. I didn't push. I sent 1 message a day. Not needy, not loaded, just present. A photo of the dog. A comment about something in the news. A normal husband checking in kind of message. She responded to maybe half of them, usually hours later, usually 1 or 2 words. On day 5, I did something I want to be straightforward about. I'm not going to dress it up or apologize for it, but I'm also not going to pretend it was nothing. I looked at our joint credit card statement online. We'd shared that account for 7 years. It was how we managed household expenses and travel, and her name was on it as much as mine was. I wasn't hacking anything, I wasn't breaking into anything. I was logging into an account I had every right to access. What I found was a charge I didn't recognize. It was from a hotel. Not a restaurant, not a resort activity, not a conference fee. A hotel, a specific boutique property in Cancun, for a room booked 3 weeks before her departure. The charge had cleared 2 days into the trip. The amount was consistent with a mid-range room, not an upgraded suite, not a conference block rate, a standard booking. Her company, I knew from a previous trip she'd taken 2 years ago, used a corporate travel management system. Everything was booked centrally and billed to the company account directly. Employees didn't pay out of pocket and get reimbursed. That wasn't how the firm operated. She had told me this herself. This charge was on a personal card.
I wrote down the hotel name, and I sat with it for a while. Then I did the thing that confirmed everything. One of her colleagues, a woman named Dana, who I'd met at a company event the previous year and who followed me on a professional networking platform, had posted a photo. A group dinner, beachside, maybe 12 people from the firm. Smiling, drinks raised, sunset behind them. She had tagged several people in it. I scanned the faces carefully. My wife was in the photo. Marcus was standing next to her. His hand was not around her shoulder the way coworkers stand in group photos. It was at the small of her back. Settled. Familiar. The way you touch someone you've been touching for a while. Dana had no idea what she'd posted. It was a casual, happy team photo, meant to show a fun work trip dinner. But in the context of everything I had already been watching for 5 months, that one detail, the placement of his hand, the ease of it, confirmed the shape of what I was looking at. I saved the photo. I checked the hotel name against his LinkedIn. His listed city, I already knew, was the same metro area as ours. I cross-referenced what I could find publicly. Nothing definitive, but enough. I closed my laptop, and I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then I made a list of everything I needed to do before she came home. She came home on a Thursday afternoon. I picked her up from the airport. Same curb, same drive, reverse direction. I had thought about whether to send a car instead, whether showing up myself sent the wrong message about where I stood. But I decided showing up was the right move. Normal, controlled. I needed her to walk into this next phase believing nothing had changed on my end. She looked rested. That was the first thing I noticed. Not tired the way you look after 2 weeks of intensive work sessions and long conference days. Rested. Tan.
She had the specific glow of someone who had spent significant time outdoors in good weather without much professional stress. Her shoulders were relaxed in a way they hadn't been in months. She hugged me at the curb. It lasted about 2 seconds. "Good trip?" I asked. "Exhausting," she said. "Really intense. I'm glad to be home." I nodded. I put her bag in the trunk. I drove. In the car, she talked about the sessions. Broad strokes. The kind of summary you give when you want to seem forthcoming without offering anything specific enough to be checked. The facilitators were excellent. The team had done really good strategic work. She felt clear about the direction of her division. It was polished, practiced even, though I couldn't prove that in the moment. It had the rhythm of a story that had been told a few times already, smoothed down by repetition into something that moved without friction. I listened. I asked 2 questions, both bland, both designed to give her space to keep talking. She filled the space comfortably, confident. She had no idea. That's the part I keep returning to when I think about those first hours. She sat in the passenger seat of our car, in the life we had built together, and performed normalcy with complete ease. No hesitation, no guilt visible anywhere on the surface. Whatever she had been doing for 15 days, she had fully compartmentalized it. She had stepped back into wife mode the way you change clothes, efficiently, without much thought. We got home, she unpacked, she showered. She came downstairs and asked what I wanted to do for dinner. And that was the moment I made my decision. Not about the marriage. I had already made that decision days earlier, quietly, with a lawyer on the phone and documents being prepared. But about this conversation, about tonight. I had been debating whether to wait, whether to let her settle back in and find her footing before I said anything. Part of me thought waiting gave me more control.
But watching her stand in our kitchen asking about dinner like the last 15 days had been exactly what she said they were, something hardened in me. I wasn't angry. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was not hot. It was cold and clear, like water that's been sitting in a still room. I knew what I knew. I had prepared what I had prepared, and I was done performing my half of something that had already ended. "I don't want to do dinner," I said. "I want to talk." She looked at me. Something moved behind her eyes, quick, almost imperceptible, a recalibration. "Okay," she said carefully. "About what?" "About Cancun," I said. "About the Hotel Cielo Azul. About Marcus." The name landed. I watched it hit. Her face didn't collapse. She was too controlled for that. But the ease drained out of it. The practiced calm flickered. She set down the glass she'd been holding, and in the silence that followed, the performance finally stopped. "That's not," she started. "Don't," I said quietly. "Not yet. Sit down. I want to show you something first." I had a folder on my laptop. Not dramatic. Not a wall of printed evidence with red string connecting photographs. Just a folder. Organized, dated, factual. I had put it together over the 10 days between finding the hotel charge and her coming home, and I had been methodical about it the way I am methodical about most things that matter to me. I opened it at the kitchen table while she sat across from me. I didn't narrate it emotionally. I didn't build to it. I just walked her through it, the way you'd walk someone through a project debrief.
Here is what I found. Here is when I found it. Here is what it means. The credit card charge first. Hotel Cielo Azul. Date, amount, confirmation that it wasn't a corporate booking. I had called the hotel directly 3 days earlier, identified myself as the cardholder, and confirmed the reservation had been made under her name for a room accommodating 2 guests.
The person on the phone hadn't hesitated. Why would they? I was calling about my own card. 2 guests. I watched her face when I said that. She was sitting very still. Then the photo. I'd printed it. Dana's group dinner shot, time-stamped visible. I pointed to where Marcus's hand was. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. A picture either tells the truth or it doesn't, and this one did. Then the timeline. 5 months of documented pattern. The phone behavior changes, the passcode, the late nights, the parking lot discrepancy, the calendar gap. Each item individually dismissible. Together, a clear and consistent picture of someone managing a parallel situation. I closed the laptop. That's what I have, I said. You can tell me I'm wrong about what it means, but you'll need to be specific. She didn't tell me I was wrong. What she did first was denial, but it was weak, the kind that doesn't even convince the person saying it. She said the hotel charge must be a billing error. She said the photo was nothing. That was just how Marcus stood near people. It didn't mean anything. She said the timeline I'd constructed was paranoid, that I'd been building a case against her in my own head for months because of my own insecurities. That last one was the most revealing, because she didn't say this is completely false and I can prove it. She said I was the problem for looking. That's a particular kind of response, and it tells you exactly where the conversation actually is. I let her finish. Then I said, you just told me I'm paranoid for noticing things. You haven't told me anything I found is inaccurate. Silence. She shifted. The denial phase ended, and the minimization phase began. Okay, she said, yes, she had spent time with Marcus outside the scheduled sessions, but it wasn't what I was making it into. They had gotten close during the project. It was emotional, she said. That word, specifically. Like it was supposed to land softer than the alternative. Not physical.
Emotional. I looked at her for a moment. A room for 2 guests, I said. Booked on our card. She looked away. The minimization phase ended. What came next was the part I had prepared myself for most carefully, because I knew it would come, and I knew it would be designed to destabilize me. She turned it toward the marriage. We had been disconnected for over a year. I was emotionally unavailable. She had felt alone. She wasn't excusing it, she said, but I needed to understand the context. I did understand the context. I had lived in it. I know the marriage had problems, I said. I've been trying to address them for 2 years. You had other options. You didn't take them. She started to cry. Not immediately. It took a moment. Like the tears had to travel some distance to arrive. And I want to be honest, it affected me. 9 years of history doesn't disappear because someone betrayed you. The sight of her crying at our kitchen table still cost me something. But it didn't change what I knew. And it didn't change what I had already set in motion. She called her mother that night. I hadn't asked her to leave, and she hadn't offered to. We existed in the house in a suspended state, not fighting, not reconciling, just occupying separate rooms with the weight of what had been said sitting between us like something physical. I heard her on the phone around 10 o'clock, voice low, door partially closed. I wasn't trying to listen. The house isn't large enough for privacy when someone is upset. Her mother called back 30 minutes later. The conversation was longer. By the following evening, her mother and her younger sister Diane were at our front door. I want to be clear about how I felt when I saw them. Not threatened, not ambushed. I had expected something like this. When someone's version of events starts collapsing, they reach for people who will help them rebuild it. Her mother had always been protective of her in a way that didn't leave much room for nuance.
Diane followed her mother's lead on most things. I had 9 years of experience with how that family unit operated under pressure. I let them in, I offered coffee, I was polite. Her mother started carefully. She said she knew this was a difficult time and she just wanted to understand what was happening. That framing, understand what was happening, was doing a lot of work. It implied the situation was ambiguous. It implied there were multiple valid perspectives that hadn't yet been fully heard. I nodded, and I said I was happy to share what I knew. I got the laptop. I walked them through the same folder I had shown my wife the night before. Same sequence, same tone. Credit card charge, hotel confirmation, 2 guests, the photo, the timeline. I didn't perform it. I didn't add emotion to it. I presented it the way you present facts, clearly, in order, without decoration. Her mother's expression changed about halfway through. Diane stopped looking at me with the defensive energy she'd walked in with and started looking at her sister instead. My wife, sitting to my left, said almost nothing during this. She made one attempt. When I got to the photo, she said, "That doesn't show what he's saying it shows." But her voice had lost its footing. It landed without conviction. Neither her mother nor Diane responded to it. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Her mother spoke first. She said, and I will remember this precisely because of how much it cost her to say it, "I don't know what to say to you right now." She was looking at her daughter when she said it, not at me. Diane asked my wife directly, "Did you share a room with him?" My wife didn't answer immediately. That pause was its own answer. "Did you?" Diane said again, quieter this time. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," my wife said finally. The room absorbed that. Her mother stood up, said she needed a moment, and walked to the kitchen.
I heard her running the tap for longer than you run a tap for a glass of water. Diane sat with her eyes on the table. My wife was crying again, but differently this time. Not the tears from the night before that had felt directed at me, meant to generate a response. These were something more private, something closer to actual grief. I closed the laptop. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. There was no satisfaction in watching her family absorb this. These were people I had known for 9 years. Her mother had been kind to me. Diane had been at our wedding. But I had also needed them to know. Not for revenge, because the story she was going to tell, the version where I was paranoid, where I had built a case out of insecurities, where the marriage failed because of my emotional unavailability, that story needed witnesses who had seen the evidence. People who could no longer be recruited into a narrative that erased what she had actually done. Her mother came back from the kitchen. She looked at me and said she was sorry. Then she looked at her daughter and said they needed to talk privately. I went upstairs. I let them have the house for a while. I had called a lawyer on day 8 of the trip. Not impulsively. I had thought about it for 3 days before I picked up the phone, turning over whether I was moving too fast, whether I was building a case around something that still had an innocent explanation, whether I would regret acting before I had the full picture. But by day 8 I had the hotel confirmation and the photo and 5 months of documented pattern. And I had also had 9 years of this marriage to draw on. And what all of that told me together was that I wasn't moving too fast. I was, if anything, right on time. The lawyer was straightforward and efficient. We spoke for 40 minutes.
I laid out the situation factually. The length of the marriage, the assets, the joint accounts, the house, no children, which simplified things considerably. She asked clarifying questions, outlined the process, and told me what she needed from me to begin drafting. I provided it over the following 2 days. By the time my wife's flight landed, the separation agreement was already in draft form, sitting in a secure folder in my email. I had not told anyone. Not my brother, not my closest friend, not anyone. I kept it contained because contained was the only way I could keep it clean. The moment you bring other people in before you're ready, the situation starts belonging to them in ways you can't control. The morning after her mother and Diane left, I came downstairs early. My wife was already in the kitchen. She hadn't slept much, I could see that. She was sitting with both hands around a coffee mug, looking at the table, and she had the specific stillness of someone who had spent the night arriving at the conclusion they'd been trying to avoid. I sat down across from her. She spoke first, which surprised me. She said she knew things couldn't continue the way they were. She said she understood if I needed space, if I needed time to figure out what I wanted. She said she wasn't going to keep defending what she'd done, because she knew there was no defense for it. She asked me if there was any part of me that wanted to try. It was the most honest she had been with me in over a year. I sat with it for a moment, because it deserved that. It was a real question,
and she was asking it from a real place. And 9 years of history means you don't dismiss that without pausing. But I had already paused. For 10 days. Alone. Without her knowing. While she was still deciding what story to tell me. I had done my grieving in private. Quietly. In the same way I do most things.
By the time she was asking me that question at the kitchen table, I had already moved through the part of this where the answer might have been different. I don't, I said. I'm sorry. I don't. She nodded slowly, like she had known but needed to hear it. I got up, went to the small desk in the hallway where I had left a printed envelope the night before, and I brought it back to the table and set it in front of her. She looked at it without touching it for a moment. Is this? Separation agreement, I said. Already drafted. You should have your own lawyer look at it before you sign anything. I've tried to make it straightforward. She picked it up, set it down again. Her hands weren't steady. What happened next I want to characterize accurately because I think there's an important distinction here. She broke down, genuinely, fully, but what she was breaking down about was not, I think, losing me. It was losing the situation, the house, the life structure, the version of herself that existed inside this marriage as a stable backdrop to whatever else she had been doing, the loss of control over how this ended. That's not a cruel observation. It might even be a sad one, but it was what I was watching, and I believed it then, and I still believe it now. I didn't hold her. I didn't leave the room either. I sat with her in it until it passed. Then I told her to take her time with the paperwork. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Straightforward by legal standards. No children, clearly divided assets, a house we agreed to sell with proceeds split evenly. My lawyer described it as uncomplicated. I suppose it was, on paper. In practice, 4 months is a long time to be legally bound to someone you are simultaneously trying to detach from.
There's an administrative intimacy to divorce that nobody warns you about. The forms that require both signatures, the joint accounts that have to be methodically separated, the insurance policies, the beneficiary designations, the shared subscriptions you discover one by one like small landmines in the ordinary infrastructure of a shared life. I moved through it steadily. That's the best way I can describe it. Not easily, steadily. Mutual friends were the first visible casualty. We have a shared social circle built over nearly a decade, couples we'd met together, friends who had absorbed us as a unit. When a marriage ends, those relationships have to choose, and most of them do choose, whether they intend to or not. Some people handled it with grace, staying genuinely neutral and maintaining separate friendships with both of us. Others made their position clear quickly, and the split was not even. Several people I had considered close friends quietly migrated toward her side of things without explanation. I noticed. I didn't chase anyone. What I did notice, and what I think is worth saying plainly, is how the story circulated. The version that reached me secondhand through people who were still in contact with both of us was a softened one. Distance in the marriage, mutual disconnection, 2 people who had grown apart. It was not technically false. There had been distance, there had been disconnection, but it was strategically incomplete in a way that redistributed responsibility so evenly that the specific thing she had done nearly disappeared inside it. I didn't run a counter-campaign. That's not how I operate, and it wouldn't have served me. The people who mattered, who knew me well enough to ask directly, got the direct answer. The rest were going to believe what they were going to believe. Then Marcus's wife found out. I don't know exactly how it happened. I hadn't contacted her. I want to be clear about that.
I had thought about it during those 10 days when I was putting the folder together, and I had decided against it. Not to protect my wife, but because inserting myself into another marriage's reckoning felt like a step beyond what I needed to do. My situation was mine to handle. But information moves, especially inside a company where 2 people have been conducting something poorly concealed for months. Someone saw something, or said something, or connected something, and it reached her. I heard about it from Dana, the same colleague whose group photo had been one of my first confirmations, who messaged me about 6 weeks after the separation became known in their office. Marcus's wife had contacted HR, not with a formal complaint exactly, but with enough specificity about the timeline and the nature of the relationship that the firm opened a review. Marcus and my wife were on the same project team. There were policies about internal relationships, particularly between people in certain reporting adjacencies. The review took 3 weeks. At the end of it, Marcus was moved to a different division, and my wife received a formal written warning that went into her personnel file. She called me after it happened, the only call after the separation that wasn't routed through lawyers. She didn't ask for sympathy. She just said she wanted me to know it wasn't something she had expected, and that she understood it was a consequence of her own choices. It was a brief call, measured, the most accountable she had ever sounded. I told her I was sorry it had affected her professionally. I meant it. Not because what she'd done deserved protection from consequences, but because I don't take satisfaction in watching someone's career take damage. That's not the same as forgiveness. It's just being a person who doesn't need other people's suffering to feel resolved. The house sold in the 3rd month. We both attended the closing separately. I didn't see her there.
Our lawyers handled the coordination. I walked out of that office with a check and no forwarding address for her, and the clean, vertiginous feeling of a life that had been fully disassembled and not yet rebuilt. 9:39 a.m. I've had time now. Not an abstract amount of time, specific time. 14 months since she walked through those airport doors and snapped at me for standing there. 11 months since the divorce finalized. 8 months since I stopped thinking about it every day and started thinking about it only when something made me think about it, which is a meaningful difference. I want to use this last part honestly, not to deliver a tidy lesson, not to wrap 9 years of marriage into a clean takeaway, but because the point of telling a story like this isn't the betrayal. The betrayal is just the event. The point is what you understand afterward that you couldn't see clearly before. Here is what I understand now. The snap at the airport wasn't an accident. It wasn't stress or exhaustion or a bad morning. It was what happens when someone has already emotionally relocated and hasn't told you yet. She wasn't snapping at me because I was bothering her. She was snapping at me because my presence was an inconvenience to something she had already decided. I was standing between her and a version of her life she had chosen, and my calm, steady, ordinary husbandness was a reminder of everything she was in the process of leaving behind. That's not a flattering interpretation of her, but I think it's an accurate one. What took me longer to understand was my own role in the conditions that made that possible, not the betrayal. I don't believe distance in a marriage justifies betrayal, and I'm not going to perform that particular kind of self-blame. But the drift. The years where I adapted instead of addressed. Where I gave space when I should have asked harder questions.
Where I confused stability with health and told myself that a marriage still standing was a marriage still working. I was a good partner in many of the practical ways. I was not always a courageous one. There is a version of those last 2 years where I push harder on the real conversations, where I say clearly and without softening it, something is wrong between us and I need us to fix it, or I need us to acknowledge it can't be fixed. I didn't say that. I said softer versions of it and accepted softer responses and kept moving forward on momentum rather than on actual examined choice. That's on me, separate from what she did. Both things can be true. What I know about myself now that I didn't know then is that I am better at seeing than I am at saying. I notice things early and accurately. I build pictures from small details. Those are real strengths. But a relationship doesn't benefit from a partner who observes clearly and speaks late. Clearly held privately doesn't protect anything. It just means you have accurate information about a situation you didn't intervene in. I'm working on that. The other thing I know is that my instinct to stay calm, to not react, to wait and watch and build a complete picture before acting, that instinct served me well in the end. I didn't make decisions in anger. I didn't say things I had to walk back. I didn't hand her the opportunity to reframe the story around my reaction rather than her actions. I moved carefully, and I moved from a position of complete information, and I protected myself in the ways that mattered. But I also know that same instinct, applied earlier in the marriage to the emotional distance rather than to the investigation of it, might have changed what there was to investigate. I'm not bitter. I want to say that clearly because I think people expect bitterness from a story like this, and I understand why. But bitterness would require me to believe I was robbed of something that should still be mine.
I don't believe that. What we had was real for a long time, and then it wasn't. And the way it ended was painful and dishonest, and cost me more than I'll fully account for here. But I'm not standing in the wreckage.
I'm standing in a different place entirely. Quieter, smaller for now, but mine in a way the last few years of that marriage weren't. I make my own schedule. I have space to think. I'm rebuilding slowly and with more intention than I brought to the life I just left. The last thing I'll say is this. Pay attention to the defenses that come before the accusations. Pay attention to the answers that arrive before the questions. Pay attention to the person who snaps at you for standing still. Not because it always means what it meant in my case, but because the people who have nothing to hide don't usually act like they're hiding something. I learned that at a curb outside an airport on a Tuesday morning. It just took me 3 weeks and a lot of careful watching to understand what I'd already seen.